Swamin iti namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine. Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Desatarine. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda. Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I want to make an announcement, and rather than do it at the end, I think I'll do it right at the very beginning, if that's okay with everybody out there. Some of you already know, and some of you may not already know. There's a challenge facing Sri Kishori and the temple and the members of the temple. The challenge is there's a developer who has a proposal before whatever the people are that have to make a zoning variance board to extend the building next door all the way to the back so that instead of seeing sunlight, we'll see another building next door. And there was an attempt before, it didn't succeed. Somehow this developer, is planning to make another attempt. I mean, that's my understanding. And there's information for you to please acquaint yourself with. Two things. The ISKCON Chicago Temple, that's www.iskonchicago.com. You all know that link. www.iskonchicago.com. And then there's a section that says block DLG, that's the initials of the developer's company, DLG, block DLG proposal. Block DLG proposal explains what the developer is planning to do and what you can do. And two things you can do immediately, One thing you can do immediately is there's some suggested prayer that you can offer to Kishori, because prayer is powerful and they're the all-powerful. So if their worshipers are praying to them in unison and very sincerely, that's powerful. And the second thing is, there is a public hearing that takes place on Tuesday. There's a public hearing that's on Zoom that takes place on Tuesday. And those who are helping to organize this, including legal advice, very capable legal advice, is recommending as many as possible be on that Zoom call, because it's a public gathering. I don't know, sky is the limit as far as how many can participate, so call in the sky into your home and have the sky join too. So we have maximum presence. I don't know exactly how that strategy works, but we're following what those who know how these things work in the city of Chicago. There's many things we can do down the way depending upon how this goes. But so here's the two things you can do again. Go online, find out how to connect to that Zoom call and be there on Tuesday, whatever the time is. It'll say the time and the details. And you begin offering prayers. There's a suggested prayer that you'll find online. Again, it's block DLG proposal. Block DLG proposal. Now, sorry for this news. It's not a nice thing to begin a Bhagavad-Gita discussion about, but I thought it would be better at the beginning than at the end. Madhurena Samacharat, better to end on a sweet note than that one. So as you see on the screen, this is Krishna and Arjuna. And of course, Krishna has already spoken Bhagavad Gita because there's Arjuna. He's ready to go, following Krishna's instruction. And the topic for this evening is Gita values. And I'll give you a little background. Some of you may already know the background. Many years ago, there were a group of devotees in London who were developing relationships, academic relationships, with Oxford University professors. Fast forward over a number of years, some ISKCON devotees enrolled in the PhD program of religious studies at Oxford University. And then fast forward a little bit more, there's now a fully accredited Vaishnava Studies division under religious studies at Oxford University. So that's big. Oxford University is a very prestigious place. And those devotees, some of those devotees connected with Oxford University, collaborated with some ISKCON devotees, people that do outreach and do education and training and so forth. And collaboratively, they had an idea. Let's take this wonderful teaching of Bhagavad Gita out of the ivory tower of Oxford University, and using our name, we can then make it really simple for everyday people, like everyday people, and that's what this is. So they came up with 6, not limited to 6, but 6 sequential values that the Bhagavad Gita teaches, and we're going to speak about value number 1. That's our topic. Compliments of the Oxford University folks and some ISKCON educators working together. There's a paragraph for each of the values, and at the end, you should receive something in your email box or however it's going to be transmitted. Those 6 and the paragraph that goes along with them, I imagine it was very carefully refined and reworded many, many times to get something that's simple and powerful. So we're going to be discussing value number 1 this evening. That was all background. A little more background. Is values, it's of course philosophy, but there's teaching, there's gyan, there's knowledge in Bhagavad Gita, but real knowledge has culture, and culture has values. Many times we've heard that Prabhupada spoke about the Vedic culture or Indian culture, or the importance of cultural conquest. So culture and its values. There are different ways of describing how values shape our lives. But here's one. The Iceberg of Culture. I've taken this from people that have studied it and people that teach it. And it applies to individuals, it applies to not-for-profit organizations, it applies to for-profit organizations, it applies to countries or groups of people. These are principles. So the metaphor, as you see on the screen, is an iceberg. And as everybody knows, there's the tip of the iceberg. And then as everybody knows, there's a whole lot more of an iceberg underneath that tip of the iceberg. So we're going to be discussing those parts of the iceberg of culture. The people that work with this, they're cultural engineers. They take over a corporation and they do some cultural engineering, for example, or whatever. When Prabhupada wanted to spread Krishna consciousness, he wanted to address the absence of culture in many places, most places, and bring forward the culture of Bhagavad-Gita. So at the tip of the iceberg, it's that which you can see, or that which you can measure, or that which is perceivable, directly perceivable stuff. That's the tip of the iceberg. In their language, the cultural engineer folks, they call it artifacts. And then below the behaviors that are perceivable and measurable, there's the values. And naturally, values drive behaviors. Values means, so let's say an organization has a mission statement, or just on a personal basis, something that you value, you hold as important, or some organization's official beliefs, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, for example. And the two interact. The measurable things interact values impacts and drives the behaviors and speech and measurable things. You know, how people dress and how people, the homes they live in, and etc. And then there's what's at the very bottom. The people that study this call it assumptions. That's something that doesn't depend upon time and circumstance, because values can change, behaviors can change, but some things don't change. Unchanging, unchallenged certainties. Let's just take one. For a spiritual culture, it's for spirit soul, part of the Supreme Soul. That doesn't change. Your values may be what they are, the behaviors may be what they are, but that bottom of the iceberg is something that doesn't change. Deeply held beliefs, unchallenged certainties. So values is where our attention is going with this gift from Oxford University folks. And values has its effect on certainly behaviors, and it needs to be in alignment with the bottom of the iceberg part, unchallenged certainties. Now, I'm going to touch on two more things before we begin this first value. Keeping this image in mind, there's the factor of knowledge, thing that you know. And there's knowledge that's like unto wisdom, and I've learned this from studies and travel and so forth. Wisdom literature, there's a lot of matching. Just like last week, some of whoever attended last week, we touched on one of those. The golden rule, wisdom, do unto others. And the converse is don't do unto others what you wouldn't want done to you. Do unto others as you would want others to do unto you. That's wisdom. And then there's information. So there's information, for example, in Bhagavad Gita, but there's more than information. We're trained largely, a Western education system is trained to be information processors. Now there are other kinds of training, but heavily loaded up with information. You pile in some information, you sit down, take an exam, you spit it back out, you get an A in your exam, you do well in your courses. Now, that's a bit of a not nice representation of what modern education is, but information technology and information processing is a very strong part, and much less emphasis on wisdom and values and character. Now, there is certainly some, but they're different. So this is the emphasis here, certainly in Bhagavad Gita and this presentation, is on the wisdom side. Then the last little preparation is to get to where we want to go. If you want to change values, you recognize my value structure doesn't match what my mouth says. My mouth speaks something, and my behavior is something else. And my values aren't in alignment with those things. And I wish to have, to close that gap between where I am and where I want to be. That's what this image is meant to show. Many of you have seen this before. I term it liminal space. Liminal meaning something in between this and that. That's liminal. That big gap between this rock and that rock over on the other side, that's a liminal space. And these values, on the one hand, they're very simple, but to actually live by them, there's a big gap between agreeing and living by them. Really, moment to moment, day by day, throughout one's life. And the good news is that the help from Krishna is always there. And so now we're ready with that little introduction for the first value. And it's an easy one, and it's a fundamental one. Sama-darshana, Pandita Sama-darshana. Many of you know the verse. The young devotee that was singing the Shringa prayers probably knows the verse because she likes to sing. We'll get there. We'll get to the verse itself. Sama means equal, and darshana means to see, or equal vision. Now, how do you do it? Because in the world in which we live, there's not equality, there's diversity. Now that's a very interesting tree. Look at all those different fruits growing on one tree. But there's varieties of fruits, varieties of insects, varieties of birds, varieties of aquatics, varieties of animals, and more varieties of animals. And so look around, and life has lots of variety, lots of differences. And then just take the human species. Out of so many species, there's a lot of variety. And there's a lot of nationality and culture and language and color and so many things. How people dress, how people look. So many differences. And then just take, the subtle part of life, aside from the physical, external part of life. How people react to stimulus or, things that cause feelings. And there's lots of internal, subtle differences amongst individuals. So many. So now there's a challenge, right? And that's the Sama-darshana principle, equal vision. There's differences in life forms, differences in people, differences in situations, differences in exchanges, and how we're supposed to see with equal vision. It's a nice idea. It's there in Bhagavad-Gita. It's a value of Bhagavad-Gita, and how it's supposed to happen. So I was hoping you'd want to know what the key is. So this is meant to show the key. There's a key at the bottom right, and in the upper left, that's a lock. The key fits the lock. And notice that the shape of the lock is a heart. So the key that fits that lock, that unlocks the heart of equal vision, Gita's idea of equal vision speaks of the equality of all living beings, where life is respected, so that life is where the equal vision goes, not the life forms of race, gender, caste, creed, species, etc. That's where all the diversity is. And then there's the soul. This is another illustration. Nice fellow looking around seeing all those little sparks, that's souls. There's some that have little tiny insect bodies you can't see so well. And there's some others that have some bigger bodies, but each of those sparks represents a soul. And that's the commonality amongst all the diversity. That's the unchanging spiritual energy or the soul that's within. So that's how equal vision becomes possible. It's a value where all living beings are seen as spirit souls. That's the key that fits the lock. So Bhagavad-Gita doesn't stop there. Some texts do. Bhagavad-Gita doesn't stop there. It starts describing some of the features of the soul. So that little skinny guy there, that's us. That's the spirit soul. That's eternal and cognizant and blissful. Satchitananda, right? That's the drop of ocean water has the same makeup as the whole ocean. The tiny spark has the same makeup as the big fire. And the soul has the same makeup as the big soul, the supreme soul. Eternality, knowledge, and bliss. Satchitananda. So now let's look at some diversity and see if we can see the soul within. There's some little babies lined up somewhere. We're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. Because when life form changes, then we're going to have another experience of another life form. If it's not human, whatever that life form is. But we're spirit soul nonetheless. That's where the equal vision takes shelter. Say it negatively. Without seeing the spiritual soul, there will not be equal vision. Say it positively. By seeing the spirit soul, I mean, it's a cute picture, and there's differences of body colors and hair colors, and they're cute little, look like swimming trunks or something. Differences, but there's some equality there, and this is going to be a little difficult to do virtually. So I don't know what to do because it's virtual. I've done this with college students virtually. And anyway, you have to be ready to be suggested to and go with it. I won't try to do it because I don't know the audience and I don't even know if you can see me. So here's the exercise. Literally, help the audience become very relaxed, sit straight, take deep breaths. So there's a relaxed state of mind and body. Literally, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, do it very slowly. And then consider, close your eyes. So you're in a contemplative and internal state of consciousness. And we're going to experience our bodies, starting with wiggling your toes, using your inner senses. Feel your feet. And stay there for a while. And then going up. Now pay attention to your lower legs. Acknowledge they're there and that's part of the body. Then going further, the thighs. And then going further up, the stomach area. I would go more slowly with the group. Then your back, and feel, perceive, pay attention to that sensation of your back there. And then the front, your chest, in your arms. And then your neck and face and head. So we just explored our body. But now we're not the body. And where do you go from there? Maybe you're the mind that's thinking about these things, but you're not the mind either. Within the mind, there's thoughts or emotions, but you're the observer of those thoughts and the emotions. You're not the thoughts or the emotions. So who's that observer? Now, let's see if we can be present with the self or our self. And again, deep breath and concentrate, sit inside your heart, because that's where you are. That's the spirit soul. The conscious entity is in the region of the heart, and ultimately connected to divine grace. We're incomplete without that. So that's a little journey, subjective journey, of experiencing in a few minutes the distinction between the conscious self and the other parts, the gross and subtle body. And then that was a nice exercise. Now, how do you stay there? Well, it's part of knowing who you are. Part of knowing who you are is knowing who you aren't, and being conscious of who you are. That spirit soul situated within the heart, it pervades and gives life to both the gross and subtle body. And that little tiny spark is very, very powerful. How powerful? Well, that tiny soul, according to the Svetashvatara Upanishad, we've all heard, it's 1/10,000th the tip of a hair. One class I heard Prabhupada describing, when you think of the tip of the hair, think of not just the last few centimeters, but the very tip of the hair, and divide that into 100 pieces, and one of those pieces into 100 pieces, and that's the size of the soul. And that tiny, 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 tiny soul is very powerful, powerful enough to animate an elephant or a squirrel. So it's not that the elephant has a bigger soul and the squirrel has a smaller one. It's just the animating force. It's very powerful animating force, moving the gross and the subtle bodies. It's very powerful. And let's take a look at a Bhagavad-Gita verse. Now the contrast here is not so good. The living entity, that's the soul, taking another gross body, attains a certain type of ear, it's an elephant ear, certain type of eye, certain type of tongue, certain type of nose, and sense of touch, which are all grouped around the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. So the senses through which we perceive things, and thus sensations, and look at the cat, cat looks really jolly, feeling very nice, at least at that moment. That feeling, the feelings that we have, that's in the mind, and the senses are bringing information from the outside in the world to the mind. And the senses are grouped around the mind, and thus there is a particular sense of sense objects that are more attractive to us, and some others that are less attractive to us. But as the saying goes, one man's food is another man's poison. So some people like this And some people don't like this. Some people like that. Some people don't like that. And here we are in this world of differences again. So we're focusing on what's same. In the human form of life, all senses are very acutely developed compared to other forms of life where a particular sense is very well developed. And so we have all these differences and differences and differences. Yet every living entity this is a Gita value that brings about Darsinah, is recognizing conscious living entity is covered in different ways. Here's a nice Bhagavad-Gita verse, as you see down in the lower right, chapter 3, Bhagavad-Gita, where the consciousness of the living entity is covered sometimes by the mode of ignorance, which is compared to an embryo covered by the womb or a tree. The consciousness of a human form where the living entity is in the embryonic stage covered by the womb, or the consciousness of a tree, or compared to a mirror covered by dust. A mirror covered by dust. That's mode of passion comparison. And mode of goodness is fire covered by smoke. So these are different life forms: ignorance, passion, and goodness. Different states of consciousness that are covered. And life forms make the covering, but that's not us. The variations, the differences that are most marked are on the physical plane, and then the subtle plane, but not the spiritual plane. So now we come to this Pandita Darsinah verse. Therefore, the Gita value teaches us, the humble sages, by virtue of true knowledge, see with equal vision, Darsinah. A learned and gentle Brahmana, that's that fellow over there in the white. A cow standing next to the Brahmana. The elephant there in the background. And there's a dog in the front, and that fellow that's chasing the dog eater. And obviously, the embodiments are different, and the modes of nature that are impelling them are different. There's like so many differences. So the position of equal vision requires knowledge, true knowledge. True knowledge is this wisdom, not just information, but seeing through the lens of knowledge. Takes some purification. But when we can see like that, then that's seeing with equal vision. You see differences, and you see oneness on the spiritual platform. You behave according to the spiritual differences. That's, Vaishnavas make distinctions, and we interact with others appropriately according to those distinctions. But we're recognizing the spirit soul within. A group of us have been reading every evening. It really struck me. Prabhupada's Pandita Darsinah is regarding trees. It was really nice. It was the Juhu story. It was what we're reading, Giriraj Swami's book. And finally, so many ordeals, permission to build the temple. And so construction was beginning. And the designers were making a plan to make the construction look like this, that, and the other thing. And as far as they were concerned, there were some trees in the way. They wanted to tear down the trees or remove the trees. Prabhupada looked at the plan. He said, why? He said, well, it's in the middle of the thoroughfare that we need to get in and out. Prabhupada said, I've seen right here in Bombay, they have trees right in the middle of a street. So build the roadway around the tree. Pandita Samadarshana. The tree has a right to live. So to this day, the tree is there, a really big tree. It's giving nice shade. And Samadarshana, seeing with equal vision. This vision awards personhood. This is now our Oxford University folks speaking like this. Personhood to all. It links everyone with divine grace and consequently with each other. Now, personhood, down there at the bottom is a monkey. The monkey, you don't normally speak of monkeys as persons, but they are. And, I've seen different monkeys have different personalities. Some of them are really dangerous, like gangsters. And some of them are very gentle and, so the personhood. But, persons and the flowers. Anyway, and mountains and sky and, etc. The birds in the background behind that girl with her bicycle. So, personhood linked with the divine grace, rather than saying the God word or Krishna word, it's just the divine grace. And that connects everyone with each other. This Pandita Samadarshana makes a connection between all forms of life. Equal vision begins with seeing ourselves as what we are and seeing other living beings as who they truly are. Notice the magnifying glass is showing that little skinny guy again. That's the soul. And that's our presentation. I meant to warn you at the beginning. This is short. So here's a reflection. There's a nice word. I think Vaisheshika Prabhu was kind of started the use of that word. Here's a reflection exercise. What are some challenging situations where you feel that you cannot see different people with equal vision? Now, just sharing, one of the places that I conducted this Gita Values number 1 was at Illinois Institute of Technology. And there's somebody in the room, I'm sure he remembers, because he commented afterwards. This was a very powerful exercise, so please do take it seriously. If you have someone you want to share this with during or after, then you can do so. What are some challenging situations where you feel that you cannot see different people with equal vision? I'm sure there must be some. Think of one person in your life with whom you have difficulty now or in the past. I'm sure you can think of one. And then maybe a particular incident connected with that person with whom you had difficulty and how you felt that time in the past where you had a run-in or some difficulty with that person. Now, we're not going to do this because we're virtual here. With your inner vision, consciously see that person as spirit soul. They're not the body, they're not their mind, they're not the behaviors, there's so many things they're not. They're spirit soul. It may be whatever other adjectives you want to add to spirit soul, but spirit soul. And by seeing that person as spirit soul, how has that changed your feelings towards them? Now, it's probably a lot easier to do that reflecting back on a circumstance that was very unpleasant than when you're going through it. But the Gita values of Samadarshana enables one to go through it as you're going through it. And you can separate the behavior and speech and everything else, how they speak and how they look and their face. And anyway, where they look angry or look or whatever, and separate all of that. That's the covering of the soul from the soul. Now, when you do like that, it doesn't mean harsh behavior is just fine. Harsh behavior is harsh behavior. It's not fine. But then behind that harsh behavior, what's the person? And there can be other things besides harsh behavior that bring difficulty to somebody. But it's a value that's taught in the Bhagavatam as well. But we're focusing on Bhagavad Gita. It's a value. Pandita Samadarshana. Vidyavanaya Sampane Brahmani Gavi Hastani Shuni Chaiva Swapakicha Pandita Samadarshana. So we have some distance to go, right? But it's a value. Now let's go back to our iceberg chart. See if I can do that. There we go. We have some stated values. Samadarshana as a value is important. And supposing we don't have that bottom of the iceberg, it kind of moves around. It's not the bottom of the iceberg doesn't move around. The unchallenged certainties don't move around, but we may be disconnected from them. If we can connect with them, then there's a line between our values and our perceivable behaviors, actions, and speech. So Bhagavad Gita is helping us to align those things to the unchanging, unchallenged realities of life, implicit convictions, then our values. So the focus of the Oxford University folks is looking at values, and we can see how values impact behaviors. Behaviors can impact values. And Bhagavad Gita is teaching us this underlying assumption that makes the value steadfast and not intermittent or static, but ecstatic. So that is Gita value number 1. And when you open up your computer or however this is going to be transmitted, you'll find in your inbox or your WhatsApp message place or however it's being transmitted, those 6, there's a little paragraph that goes along with it, each one of the 6, and they're connect. They're not necessarily chronological or sequential that way, but they do fit well together. They're values to live your life by, to help you come to the stage of self-realization, to know who you are. So let's see if there's some discussion. We've gone for good 48 minutes. Let's see if there's some discussion from some of our participants. Okay. How are we doing? What's the procedure? People have to do that little click the raise their hand thing and we call on them? Or how are you going to do it?
I mean, they can just, anybody, if they have any questions, please unmute yourself and kindly ask the question on Zoom. And I'll be monitoring the YouTube as well.
If somebody's speaking, I can't hear. If there was some noise.
Yeah, I don't see any questions on YouTube as well.
Let's see if there's something in the room. There's something in the room.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Maharaj, this is the equal vision was so nice, and it's a great value, to be practiced. But how to deal with the circumstances where a person's behavior and actions has impacted us severely, especially in harsh behavior, how to overcome that memories, or how to overcome those interactions with those persons again when we go and meet them, and especially with the equal vision what we learned from Bhagavad Gita.
Well, how to? That how to has a very simple answer. It's a gradual. Spiritual life is a gradual reawakening. Spiritual life is a gradual reawakening, and so the how to isn't going to happen quickly. But it's starting from our Bhagavad Gita message at the beginning. Those experiences that you described, there is part of duality, because there are some others that make you happy and then some others that just do the opposite. So the advice that Bhagavad Gita gives, Krishna gives at the beginning, is you tolerate both sides, not finding happiness in this side and unhappiness in that side, but you tolerate. And when you tolerate, what does that mean? You invest your consciousness in that which is eternal. Saying the same thing. There is no happiness in this material world. And it's not just there's only unhappiness. There's no happiness in the transcendental sense of what happiness is. There is no happiness in this world. So when that reality is acknowledged, you practice, you cultivate turning attention to transcendence. And when one is absorbed, going further in Bhagavad Gita, when one is absorbed in transcendence, then chapter 6 Bhagavad Gita, one is even in the midst of the greatest calamity is not disturbed. But that takes transcendence. So how do you get to transcendence? You start with tolerating. And when that, whatever it is that you described comes, you tolerate it. You withdraw attention from asat and invest attention in sat. And you practice and practice. And if you're not practiced at it, then you'll be disturbed. So the how-to question is making progress in Krishna consciousness by the bhakti process, starting with sadhu sangha. And you practice and you practice. You cultivate transcendence. You cultivate. So take shelter by another way of answering your question, by chanting offenseless japa. That's how.
Thank you, Maharaj.
The cultivation of Krishna bhakti brings transcendence. And you have to do the best you can in between now and then. That's that liminal space diagram. We don't want to stay over on this side. We want to go to that side. And in between, we're not really feeling so secure because we're not over there, not growling and snarling and behaving like an animal because we're trying to become civilized and we're not there yet. So you tolerate and turn attention to Sat.
Thank you, Maharaj.
You have something?
I have a question and then there's an online
Okay, go for it.
the Pandita Samadarshana, seeing everyone with equal vision, does that mean treating everyone with equal vision?
No, the behavior, your behaviors towards a lion is not going to be the same towards your father and your mother. So, behaviors are going to be, are your best friends. We don't go and embrace it. Prabhupada's saying, we don't go and embrace a tiger. The behavior towards different persons is customized for the person. While you're customizing your behaviors, speech and actions, etc., try to see spirit soul. Try not to see other than spirit soul, like friends, enemies, and this is pleasing, that's not pleasing. We can discriminate what's what. We don't turn that. We don't turn our intelligence into an off position. We discriminate. Here's this mode. Here's that mode. Here's the other mode. Here's the combination, etc. We can see what's out there, and then we conduct ourselves accordingly. The behaviors are customized for the circumstance, but see the spirit soul all the while. That's the point. Pandita Samadarshana. Next.
There are two questions online. First is from Preeti Lakshana Mataji. For example, thinking of Hitler as a soul,
Ooh.
does that minimize the experience of the people who he tortured and killed? Please forgive me if this question is not clear.
No, the question's clear. The behavior is demoniac, and that demoniac behavior comes from a series of choices made by a soul that went into a dark place. And his dark places impacted a lot of people. So the behavior is not okay. But, that spirit soul is a spirit soul nonetheless. And the Supreme Soul sanctioned, otherwise he couldn't do. And, where that spirit soul is today, I can take a guess. It's not in a place of light. It's a place of darkness. We don't, rub our hands together and say, ha ha, he got his. But same point. You can recognize behavior according to modes of nature and other criterion, and they're different. And how those bad behaviors are impacting other people, you can certainly discern and recognize those things. And then your conduct towards those persons, the Hitler persons or the, cruel persons. There's some other cruel persons around these days. There's always demons. So you have to like them, but you see them as a spirit soul, and according to your position, you stay as far away as you can from such people, or you take up an appropriate action according to your position, but don't forget to see them as spirit soul, because you lose the spirit soul part, and everything gets all messed up. Your values get moved around like a rubber band, and you're not happy. Next.
That was actually from Sundar Radha, and there was a first part where she was talking about teaching the Holocaust in school, and she was asking about this, so I missed the first part. But the crux of the question was asked. The next question is from Shubhra Mataji. Guru Maharaj, I used to think all assumptions are illusory. With Iceberg of Culture, is it right that we need to evaluate our assumptions in light of Shastra and only disregard the ones that don't match? And also, we will always have assumptions underneath our actions.
Yes.
And our job is to hold on to the assumptions that are in alignment with Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra.
Yeah. Yes. And it takes some excavation and purification to get there. So, going back to what you said earlier, yes, we have some underlying assumptions. Everyone. Demons have underlying assumptions. Passionate people have underlying assumptions. Mode of good. So everybody has some. So we have to do some excavation and being patient and continue to refine and refine and refine so that that alignment that you spoke about comes about. But so yes to what you said. I'm just modifying the language a little bit. How are we doing? Right, it looks to me like we're at 6:30.
That's all the questions.
Huh?
That's all the questions online.
Okay, looks like we're done.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, this is Chaitanya Kishore Das. One question I have,
Okay,
if you
go
have
for
one
it.
more minute.
Go ahead.
The iceberg of culture, this is a very beautiful diagram. The assumptions that you mentioned, aren't they also shaped by the circumstances and the surrounding that we are born in or raised in?
Yes.
So how do you change that, if you have to?
Well, yeah, he asks Tira, she'll knows. But the answer has to do with sadhusanga.
Okay.
And in sadhusanga, then you're going to get sadhu-like sound vibration. And that sadhu-like sound vibration will help purify, remove impurities, and awaken the eternal assumptions, unchanging, unchallenged, implicit convictions.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah? Sound vibration is very important. And the association is going to determine your sound vibration.
I think that's where devotees come in and kind of forcibly give that sound vibration.
Yeah,
to people.
think of that picture we showed of different cultures. Now, how did people get to look like that? Why they dress this way, and why they keep their hair that way, and why do they this? And it has everything to do with the association that they've had.
Right. Makes sense. Yep.
And so same with devotional. All three of these, features of an iceberg. We're through association trying to spiritualize each one of them and strengthen them. Okay.
Makes sense. Thank you so much, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. So our hour is up. I'm going to just make this little announcement again. I think everybody heard it, but that's okay. Hear it again. The Kishori temple and Kishori themselves have a challenge. Now, Krishna is the personality of Godhead, and so he will be victorious, but we're his servants, and we have to do some service to give protection to him, and he will protect us. That challenge is there's a developer who wants to bring an issue to whatever the city authorities are, a variance on the type of building that's there now to allow him to build a building all the way right next to ours, all the way to the back of the property, where those nice picture windows we have are going to have somebody's face on the other side of the window. The building would be, if he gets this approved, it's going to be a different experience for us, and what to speak of the people that are in that building, and our kirtans and everything else. So it happened before. There's a way to stop it, and I want you to please take a look at the website and find out what is the proposal. Block DLG proposal. Again, block DLG proposal. That's at the ISKConChicago.com website, and you can find out what the proposal is. And Tuesday, whatever the time it says, go on your Zoom and Zoom away and join the meeting, as many purposes as possible. And your friends and your dog and cat, get everybody on that Zoom call and be present and be, I don't know exactly what is supposed to happen when you're on the Zoom call, but they'll see a lot of names. There's a lot of interest in this topic. And voice objection, however that's best done. and offer prayers. There's a recommended little prayer you can say. Say it every morning, every evening. Say it every morning, every evening. And lots of voices of prayer to Kishori. They'll hear the prayer. They like to protect their devotees. Devotees like to protect Krishna. So let's take some practical actions, and we'll see where this goes. Stay tuned. There will be updates as time moves along, whatever direction this thing moves in. There'll be some services for you to do, even in your home. Okay, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Thank you so much, Maharaj, for this wonderful class. Also, to just add on to what Maharaj said,